The golden light of dawn stretched lazily across the quiet streets of Maple Ridge Estates, catching the glint of dew on the freshly mowed lawns and the polished surfaces of mailboxes that all looked exactly the same. The air smelled faintly of jasmine and morning coffee, and the world felt still except for the low hum of my Ford F-150 as it idled in my driveway. The truck was still dusty from a weekend camping trip with my son, a layer of dirt and pine needles clinging stubbornly to the tires. To me, it was the smell of freedom and fresh air. To my neighbors, apparently, it was a scandal. I had just stepped back into the house, coffee mug in hand, when I heard the telltale squeak of wheels. A small, battery-powered golf cart came chugging up the street, its little HOA emblem gleaming on the side. I didn't even need to look to know who was behind the wheel. Margaret Pennington, the self-declared queen of Maple Ridge Estates, self-appointed guardian of neighborhood standards, and the terror of every homeowner who dared step an inch out of line. "Mr. Daniels," she called before she'd even stopped moving. Her voice was sharp, shrill, and commanding, the kind that made you feel like you were already in trouble. She climbed out of the cart with a clipboard tucked under one arm and a phone in the other, ready for battle. "We need to have a talk." I took a slow sip of my coffee, pretending not to notice her for a few seconds. "Morning, Mrs. Pennington," I said finally, forcing a polite smile. "Beautiful day, isn't it?" Her eyes narrowed as she scanned my driveway like a detective at a crime scene. "You can't park that truck there overnight," she said, pointing at the F-150 as though it were a dead animal. "It's against HOA regulations, Section 4, subparagraph B." I blinked at her, fighting back a chuckle. "It's in my driveway, on my property." "Yes," she said tightly, flipping open her clipboard. "But Maple Ridge Estates has standards. We prohibit the overnight parking of trucks, boats, trailers, or work vehicles in driveways. It's a matter of neighborhood aesthetics." "Aesthetics?" I echoed, raising an eyebrow. "It's a clean pickup truck, not a dump truck full of scrap metal, Mrs. Pennington puffed up her chest like a rooster preparing for a fight. "That's not the point. If we allow one person to break the rule, others will follow. Next thing you know, we'll have RV in front yards and unregistered cars rusting in driveways. The community must maintain order." "Order?" I repeated, swirling the coffee in my cup. "You make it sound like a crime scene." Her lips pursed so tightly I thought she might swallow her own words. "Rules exist for a reason, Mr. Daniels. You agreed to them when you bought your home." I smiled faintly. "I also agreed to pay property taxes. Pretty sure that means I get to use my own driveway." Mrs. Pennington let out a small gasp, clearly offended by my lack of remorse. She began scribbling furiously on her clipboard, muttering something about formal violation notice. I watched her for a moment, amused by her determination, before deciding to let it go. I had work to do, and honestly, her little power trip wasn't worth the effort of arguing. By noon, I'd almost forgotten about the encounter. I was cleaning up the garage when I heard something I didn't expect, the rising wail of sirens. I stepped outside, squinting against the afternoon sun, just in time to see two patrol cars turning into my cul-de-sac. Red and blue lights reflected off my truck's windshield as the cars pulled up in front of my house. My stomach dropped for half a second before reason kicked in. I hadn't done anything wrong. But that didn't stop my neighbors from peeking out behind their curtains, faces pressed to glass like curious spectators at a circus. Mrs. Pennington was standing proudly near my mailbox, talking animatedly to one of the officers, gesturing toward my truck like she'd just uncovered a major criminal enterprise. "Thank goodness you're here," she said, her voice carrying across the lawn. "He's violating HOA rules and being uncooperative. I told him to move that eyesore, and he refused." The officer she was talking to looked puzzled. "Ma'am, just to be clear, you called 911 for a parking violation." "It's not just parking," she snapped. "This is a community safety issue. What if someone else does the same thing? What if it blocks traffic or attracts the wrong type of people? The second officer climbed out of the other patrol car, and the moment his eyes landed on me, his expression changed. His posture straightened, and his confusion turned to awkward recognition. Sheriff Daniels," he said cautiously. Mrs. Pennington froze, turning toward me. "Sheriff," she repeated weakly, as if the word itself had betrayed her. I walked down the driveway slowly, badge glinting from my belt. "Afternoon, gentlemen. Something wrong here." The first officer shifted uncomfortably, glancing at Mrs. Pennington, then back at me. "We got a call about a disturbance, but it looks like a misunderstanding, I'll say," I replied, keeping my tone even. "Ma'am, you called emergency services because my personal vehicle is parked in my own driveway." Mrs. Pennington's face went crimson. I didn't realize." "That's fine," I interrupted gently. "But next time, I'd appreciate it if you saved 911 for actual emergencies. We've got officers dealing with real crimes, real emergencies, people who genuinely need help." One of the officers coughed, trying to hide a grin. The other pretended to check something on his radio. Mrs. Pennington looked like she wanted the ground to swallow her whole. "I just wanted to keep the community safe," she said meekly. "Safe from what?" I asked with a small smile. "My parked truck." For a moment, nobody said anything. Then, one of the officers chuckled under his breath, which only made her fluster more. I suppose this was a misunderstanding," she said quickly, clutching her clipboard like a life preserver. "Seems that way," I said. "No harm done. But next time you've got a concern, Mrs. Pennington, my office has a non-emergency line. You can call there. They'll be happy to direct you." Her chin trembled slightly, but she nodded. "Understood, Sheriff." As the patrol cars drove away, the street fell silent again. My neighbor's blinds twitched shut one by one, and the afternoon breeze carried away the faint sound of laughter from the officers as they turned the corner. I stood there for a moment, sipping my coffee again. It had long gone cold, and looked at my truck, still sitting there. Still perfectly fine. Mrs. Pennington climbed back into her golf cart and sped off without another word, her pride trailing behind her like exhaust smoke. I smiled to myself, walked back up the driveway, and patted the hood of my truck. "Guess we're staying put, partner," I muttered. That night, when the sun went down and the streetlights flickered on, I parked my F-150 in the exact same spot. If she wanted to call the cops again, I figured she could explain to my deputies why she thought the county sheriff's truck was a public menace. 2 weeks passed, and Maple Ridge Estates had gone unusually quiet, at least on the surface. No one mentioned the truck incident outright, but I could feel the whispers following me like a shadow every time I walked the dog or checked the mail. A few neighbors smiled awkwardly when they saw me. Others crossed the street, and a handful seemed genuinely amused by the whole thing. But one person, of course, wasn't letting it go. Mrs. Pennington. Her pride had taken a serious hit that day. The way she'd stood in front of the patrol cars, demanding justice for her HOA bylaws, only to discover she'd called the sheriff on the sheriff. That humiliation had clearly cut deep. So, when an anonymous complaint landed on my desk at the county office a few days later, I wasn't even surprised. The report claimed that a resident of Maple Ridge Estates was displaying a pattern of disruptive behavior, verbal intimidation, and failure to comply with community standards. It didn't name me directly, but the attached address was my own. I read it twice just to make sure I wasn't imagining it. I leaned back in my chair and chuckled quietly. "She's really doubling down," I said to myself. Deputy Collins, who sat a few desks away, looked up from his paperwork. "What's funny, Sheriff? Just an HOA thing," I said with a grin. "You ever deal with someone who can't accept losing an argument?" He laughed. "You mean my ex-wife? Something like that," I said. "Only this one files paperwork instead of divorce papers. By the end of the week, I decided enough was enough." I wasn't going to waste county time chasing her complaints, but I wasn't going to let her keep stirring up trouble either. So when the HOA monthly meeting came up, I made sure to attend, in uniform, badge and all. The meeting was held in the Maple Ridge Clubhouse, a neat little building with beige walls, folding tables, and a stale smell of lemon cleaner. When I walked in, the room fell quiet. Every seat was filled with residents, retirees in pastel polos, young parents clutching coffee cups, and a few curious faces who clearly came just to see what drama would unfold. At the front sat Mrs. Pennington, her name tag perfectly centered, a thick stack of papers in front of her, and that same tight-lipped smile she wore when she thought she was in control. She didn't look up as I entered, but her hand paused mid-pen stroke. "Evening, everyone," I said, nodding to the crowd. "Appreciate you letting me sit in tonight, Sheriff Daniels," she said, her voice brittle but polite. "This is a private homeowners association meeting. Unless you're here as a resident, I'm afraid, actually." I interrupted gently. "I'm here in both capacities, as a resident and as your county sheriff. I wanted to discuss a few matters related to emergency service misuse and community cooperation." That got their attention. A few eyebrows rose, and a couple of people leaned forward in their chairs. Mrs. Pennington's smile faltered, but she gestured stiffly to an empty chair. "Of course, you're welcome to join us." I took my seat near the front and placed a few papers on the table. A copy of the HOA bylaws, the incident report from her 911 call, and a letter from the county attorney outlining what constitutes misuse of emergency dispatch. When the floor opened for community issues, I stood up. "Before we move to neighborhood landscaping and pool maintenance," I said, "I think we should address something that affects both your HOA and the sheriff's department." All eyes turned to me. Mrs. Pennington's pen froze again. "2 weeks ago," I began, "a call was placed to 911 regarding a vehicle parked in a private driveway. That call resulted in 2 patrol cars being dispatched to Maple Ridge Estates. Now, I want to make it clear, we take every call seriously, but our emergency line is for genuine crises, medical emergencies, crimes in progress, threats to public safety." A low murmur spread across the room. Someone in the back said softly, "She didn't," but the rest of the sentence was drowned out. I continued, "Using 911 to enforce HOA rules not only wastes county resources, it also delays response to people who truly need help. We've got limited units covering the area, and every unnecessary call takes time away from someone in real danger." Mrs. Pennington's face went pale. "Sheriff, with all due respect, I was only enforcing the community regulations. I didn't mean any harm." "I know you didn't," I said calmly, "and I'm not here to embarrass anyone. I'm here to make sure everyone understands the boundaries between local law enforcement and homeowners association policies. The law will always take precedence over HOA bylaws, always." There was silence for a beat. Then a hand shot up. It was Mr. Harris, one of the quieter board members, an older gentleman who usually kept to himself. "Honestly, Margaret," he said, turning to her, "I think we've gotten a little too strict lately. Folks are afraid to park in their own driveways. That's not what this neighborhood was supposed to be about." A few others nodded in agreement. Mrs. Pennington opened her mouth to respond, but before she could, a woman across the room spoke up. "I remember when my son's car got towed last year because it didn't fit in the garage. You said it was unsightly. Maybe it's time we rethink some of these rules." The murmurs grew louder, and I could see the shift happening. For months, Mrs. Pennington had ruled with intimidation and technicalities, but now the residents were starting to push back. "I'm not against rules," I said, holding up a hand to calm the room. "They keep things organized, but rules should serve the people, not the other way around. You can have a beautiful community and still treat folks like neighbors, not suspects." That earned a few claps. Even the board treasurer, a nervous-looking man in glasses, smiled and nodded. Mrs. Pennington sat frozen, her clipboard untouched for once. I'd also like to propose, I added, that you revise your parking clause. Make it more reasonable. Allow residents to park their personal vehicles in their driveways as long as they're in good condition. That's what most HOAs in the county do. Mr. Harris spoke up again. I second that motion. The room erupted in quiet applause. Mrs. Pennington tried to regain her composure, but it was too late. The tide had turned. The power she once wielded through fear had evaporated in a single meeting. She adjusted her glasses and muttered, "Perhaps we can discuss revisions at the next board session. That'd be a good start," I said with a smile. "And maybe next time we can skip the police involvement. A neighborhood barbecue sounds like a better way to resolve things." Laughter filled the room. Light, genuine laughter that hadn't been heard in that clubhouse for a long time. For the first time since moving there, I saw people relax. When the meeting ended, several neighbors came over to shake my hand. "Thanks for setting things straight, Sheriff," one of them said. "We were getting tired of walking on eggshells." "Just doing my job," I replied. As I stepped outside, the night air felt different, warmer somehow, less tense. Porch lights glowed softly across the cul-de-sac, and the hum of quiet conversation drifted from open windows. Across the street, Mrs. Pennington stood on her porch, arms folded. She didn't say anything, just watched me. For a moment, I thought she might storm over again, but instead, she gave a slow, reluctant nod. Not a smile, not an apology, but an acknowledgement. I returned the nod, climbed into my F-150, and started the engine. The familiar rumble filled the night, echoing down the quiet street that finally, for once, felt peaceful. From that day on, no one complained about my truck. In fact, by the next month's meeting, the HOA had officially revised its parking policy. The rule that once started all the chaos was gone, and every time I parked in my driveway after a long shift, I'd look around at the calm, quiet neighborhood and think with a grin sometimes all it takes to restore order is reminding people who really keeps it.